On behalf of the JSW School of Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the India 2031, the Decade of Transformation Public Talk Series. India, along with the world, is now in the decade of action, of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Across the entire spectrum of social policy, be it health, education, sanitation, food security, housing, or other social services, India is now steadily progressing from increasing access to improving quality of social services. Moreover, social policy making in India is integrated and spans across multiple sectors. Therefore, providing clean cooking energy, increasing financial inclusion, reforming agriculture, and digitalizing service delivery are just as critical for making a sustainable social impact as our direct interventions in health and education. These developments and realities imply that policymakers in India need to align social policy design with global SDGs, but retain a sharp focus on local needs and context. To elaborate more on social sector priorities, we are extremely fortunate to have Shri Amitabh Kant, CEO of Niti Aayog, to deliver the inaugural India 2031, the Decade of Transformation public lecture. The theme of his public lecture is going to be public policy priorities for the social sector, leaving no one behind in New India. Shri Amitabh Kant is an IAS officer of the 1981 batch and currently the CEO of Niti Aayog. He is a key driver of award-winning initiatives such as Make in India, Startup India, Incredible India, God's Own Country, and his work has helped position India as a leading manufacturing and tourist destination. Mr. Kant is also an author and has written several books, including Branding India, An Incredible Story, Incredible India 2.0, Synergies of Growth and Governance, and edited the book The Path Ahead, Transformative Ideas for India. Mr. Kant is also the recipient of several awards, including the Economic Times Policy Change Agent of the Year and the Golden Peacock Award for Leadership in Economic Transformation. Joining Shri Amitabh Kant is Shri Pankaj Kumar, Chief Secretary of Gujarat State. Shri Pankaj Kumar is an IAS officer of the 1986 batch. He brings with him rich experience in various departments such as revenue, home, health, and family welfare, agriculture, disaster and relief management in various capacities. He has also served in state PSUs like Gujarat Maritime Board, Gujarat State Road Transport Corporation, Gujarat Mineral Development Corporation, and so on. Moderating the discussion today will be Professor Errol D'Souza, who is a professor of economics and director at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He has held appointments such as the IFCI Chair Professor at the University of Mumbai, India Chair Professor at the Université Sciences Po in Paris, and Honorary Senior Fellow of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. He has been associated with the Planning Commission of India and the Reserve Bank of India in various capacities. He is also on the Academic Council of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, the Institute for Human Development in Delhi, and on the advisory board of the International Center for Development and Decent Work at Kassel, Germany. So without much further ado, I hand over the stage to Shri Amitabh Kant.
Professor Errol D'Souza, my distinguished colleague, Mr. Pankaj Kumar, Chief Secretary of Gujarat, Mr. Param Iyer, Professor Namrata Chindakar, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me thank the JSW School of Public Policy at IIM Ahmedabad for inviting me to deliver this inaugural public lecture on public policy priorities for the social sector, leaving no one behind. I have for long worked in the state of Kerala, and my belief is been that if India really needs to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% over a 3-decade period, year after year, to be able to lift a very, very young population above the poverty line. India is passing through a window of demographic transition, which rarely happens in history, and therefore this growth is critical. We've grown at those high rates for short periods, for 5 years, 6 years, but you need to sustain this over a 3-decade period. And if you need to sustain this for 3-decade period, you need to do several things. One of which, to my mind, is that India needs to improve its learning outcomes. India needs to get its health outcomes right. India needs to improve largely, to a very great extent, on nutrition outcomes. So social indicators, we must get them right, and much of that action lies in the domain of state governments. Secondly, I'm a strong believer that quite often we get into the sunset areas of industries, and it's very difficult to penetrate global markets in sunset areas of industries. By that time, other countries have moved in, other companies have moved in, and therefore, to dethrone established companies which have got the size and scale becomes very difficult, and therefore India must get into sunrise areas of growth. It must get into areas of electric mobility, battery storage. It must use the power of being data rich and data intelligent to do a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Since it's made a breakthrough in renewables, it must use renewables to crack water and create green hydrogen and become a major global champion of green hydrogen and green ammonia, so that it can cut down its fossil fuel imports, of which we do about 160 billion, and in a decade will be about 320 billion. It must focus on being a fast grower in 5G technologies, which will be a very major driver of growth in the coming years. And to my mind, another area where it must get in and make breakthroughs because of its strength in the pharmaceutical sector is genomics. So the third key thing is, if India is to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% over a long period of time, India must do planned scientific urbanization. Because in the coming 5 decades, India will see over 500 million people getting into the process of urbanization. And 500 million people getting into the process of urbanization means that you have to create almost 1.5 Americas for India in the 5 decades. And when America urbanized, they actually made cities for cars and not for people. So the American car companies bought over the railway companies, destroyed them, and actually much of their industrialization was driven by the automobile sector. So how does India do urbanization for the people and not for the cars? How does it do compact, dense urbanization on the back of public transportation will really be the key to India's future. And it will be very critical that it does planned scientific urbanization, not the sprawling urbanization which America and Europe did, but it has an opportunity to do something unique, because when America's today has 900 cars per 1,000 people, Europe has about 820 cars per 1,000 people. In India, we just have 20 cars per 1,000 people. And therefore, it does not have the legacy issues. And when it transits to a shared, connected, and a zero-emission world, it has a massive opportunity to create sustainable cities of tomorrow. And so therefore, urbanization can be a very big driver of growth and job creation for India. Then fourthly, to my mind, it's very critical for India to do technological leapfrogging by using its huge strength in digitization. India has been able to very rapidly advance ahead of most of the other countries because it's the only country which on the back of Jam Trinity and the India stack has over 1 billion biometrics, over 1 billion mobile and over 1 billion bank account. When I was a young officer in Kerala, I was working in the traditional fisheries sector. One of the challenges given to me was to change the lives of traditional fishermen. And I worked for over 3 years, giving them new fishing crafts, which are fiberglass crafts, giving them outboard motors to go into the high sea, much further into the sea, giving them new fishing nets, which are then known in Kerala as disco nets. But fishermen were prone to drinking, and therefore it was very important to open their bank accounts. And opening their bank accounts was the toughest job. I had to chase bank managers for forming their self-help groups. Know Your Customer used to take 8 to 9 months chasing bank managers. And that was the toughest job I've done in my career, chasing bank managers to open bank accounts for traditional fishermen. Today it is possible to open a bank account in less than a minute using your biometric. So that has been the digital transformation of India from 9 months to less than a minute. We are the only country who, through technological leapfrogging, has been able to, when again I was a young officer, all the money used to be transferred from center to state, state to districts, and then to villages, and there used to be massive leakages. And today, across 526 schemes of the government, we send money straight into the bank account of the beneficiaries, and not a single paisa of leakage. Look at what we've done in UPI, the Unified Payment Interface. Over 200 banks are interconnected at the back. The UPI has just last month done over 100 billion worth of transactions. And I have for 2 years not used my credit card. I have not used my checkbook. I use my mobile for all my payments. And therefore, what India has done in terms of payment is totally digital and seamless. And if UPI, as I was saying in the morning, its transactions are more than Amex, American Express, in 2 years' time it will overtake Visa. If it was a private company, its valuation would be probably more than Microsoft or Apple. And therefore, India has demonstrated its great strength as being a digital nation. Look at the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, the Ayushman Bharat scheme of health insurance, 500 million Indians who've been insured. It's a totally digital scheme. You can be in Tamil Nadu moving to Bihar or vice versa. You will carry your health insurance with you. Or look at CoWIN. We've had a totally digital, verifiable, seamless certification of the vaccination process, which no other country in the world has been able to do. And that's why we've used technology to leapfrog, and in the process, we've thrown up massive amount of data. Our data costs are the cheapest in the world, and every 3 seconds, we are creating a new internet user, every 3 seconds. And therefore, with this vast amount of data, being data rich, how do we become data intelligent? How do we use AI and machine learning to technologically leapfrog and solve the problems of the country in terms of nutrition, health, learning outcomes, education, agriculture productivity will be probably one of the biggest challenges, because in future many of these challenges will be solved by our young startups. And as they unfold to disrupt the established industry of today and solve these problems, we will not be solving the problem of just the 1.3 billion people of India, but actually the 5 billion people of the world who will be moving from poverty to middle class in the next 2 to 3 decades. And therefore, this technological leapfrogging will really be the key to India's growth and progress in the years to come. So, the use of this rich data and making India digitally intelligent really holds the key. And the last key to my mind is about India really going green, because in the context of what the Prime Minister has committed at the Glasgow COP26, one must be very clear that by 2026, Europe is going to put border taxes on products which are not green. It will not be possible for countries and companies to grow without going green as an active policy. Valuations of companies and of countries and of corporates will rise by going green. And this gives India another massive opportunity to disrupt sectors after sectors. Not as a passive spectator, but actively pursuing the philosophy of going green, as we have done in the case of renewables. So we've been able to put up about 110 gigawatt of renewable power in India at price points which are the lowest in the world. And we've been able to attract some of the finest investments from across the world in the renewable sector, and particularly in Gujarat. Huge amount of investment has come in the renewable sector, largely due to its active policies. And today, this renewable at such low costs enables you to actually crack water and create green hydrogen. We import 160 billion worth of fossil fuel, and how this import of fossil fuel will become about 320 billion in the next decade, how we can actually become a totally non-importing nation using green hydrogen. It is important to understand that electricity in India is just 20% of energy, just 20% of energy. It is very important to understand this dimension. Electricity, in which renewable is one component, is just 20% of energy. The balance 80% of the energy comes from refinery sector through fossil fuels. It comes through steel. It comes through fertilizer. All of this is fossil fuel used. Coal cannot be used there. Coal cannot substitute these areas of steel, of this, and therefore electricity cannot substitute, and therefore you need non-fossil fuel. And when you need non-fossil fuel, green hydrogen is really the solution and the answer to that. So how does India become a global champion of what the Prime Minister said in his Independence Day address? How does India become a global champion of green hydrogen, and in its liquid form become a champion of exporting green ammonia to the rest of the world, and become totally non-dependent on fossil fuel by 2047, when India becomes 100 years, is its key challenge. And therefore, 5 key areas to my mind. One is, how do we improve learning outcomes, health outcomes, nutrition? How do we get into sunrise areas of growth, of electric mobility, battery storage, AI, green hydrogen, genomics, etc.? How do we do scientific urbanization? How do we technological leapfrog? And how do we do going green through the hydrogen route? But in all this, as I talk here today, if you want to change the life of people, and if you want to grow with equity, to my mind, it's not possible for India to grow without improving learning outcomes and health outcomes and focusing on nutrition. That, to my mind, really is the key to growth with equity. And in this area, a lot of work has been done through the Sustainable Development Goal Framework, which actually, and this is the decade of the action. And we've, in Niti Aayog, actually do a lot of work in localization of the SDGs. We rank the states in their performance on SDG. And we actually put out this ranking in public domain. We've recently ranked the states of Northeast, all on the SDG performance, all the districts of Northeast on SDG ranking. We are taking this to sub-national level and actually at the very district level, so that every district must know where they are standing on the parameters of poverty, health, nutrition, and education. This is critical. Now, it is almost about 18 months since the COVID-19 pandemic manifested itself. It's been very unprecedented and unparalleled, and the battle against pandemic is still not over. And this has had a huge, huge impact on both learning outcomes and health outcomes. And actually, to my mind, while on SDG, and if you look at the multi-poverty index, which is done by the Oxford University, India has lifted over 270 million people above the poverty line in the last about decade. But COVID, because of its huge impact on education and health, would have had a very adverse impact. And therefore, what do we do to ensure that we can continue on this path of lifting people above poverty lines and have a massive impact on nutrition, health, and education? Because while we continue to provide education and health, outcomes remain very poor in many of these areas. And therefore, one of the key challenges is that how do we work with state governments? How do we work with the private sector? How do we make this as a challenge? And this is important because human capital matters the most, to my mind. It matters the most is because let us look across the world. And it's very important when in a country like India to look across and see what is happening around the world. And when you look across, you will find that the per capita income of South Korea, China, and India in the 50s was exactly on par. Exactly on par. By the 60s, South Korea's per capita index, per capita income had actually gone 4x of China. 4x of China by the 60s. It had gone 3x of India. 3x of India, 4x of China. South Korea's per capita income in a period of a decade. And at that time, many developmental economists, it was almost all the policy gurus and development economists said that it was because of total factor productivity. If you look deeper today and you look at per capita incomes of South Korea today, they're about $30,000 US. China is at about 10,000, India is at about 2,000. Now, how come South Korea has grown so enormously? China is at 10,000, India is at 2,000. What is the difference? And to my mind, the difference is that the explanation was not about total factor productivity. It was the explanation of cross-country income differences as the existing modes of production, labor, and capital. The answer to that they would be better utilized and therefore countries will do well, was not an adequate answer. The answer really lay in the fact that human capital of South Korea was much better in terms of its health, in terms of its education, in terms of its levels of schooling, in terms of its innovation, in terms of entrepreneurship, social security, and they are all important determinants of a successful nation. The development experiences of countries in Asia show that investments in health, education, nutrition, and skill development are just as necessary, if not more important, than economic reforms and investment in physical and digital infrastructure. Therefore, it's important to focus on actually health, education, nutrition, and skill development as necessary for sustained economic growth over a long period of time. And it is only when you do well in many of these parameters of social indicators, you will do well in the long run and be able to sustain your growth over a 3-decade period. I'm making these points because it's important to understand that there is a lot of regional disparity in this country. And it's important to touch upon some of these factors to say that if India is to do well, why states have to be the key driver of this growth. Now, if you look to the health sector on the input side, we face a shortage of infrastructure, manpower, and financing. And, and I can go on and on as in terms of the beds per thousand population. India is just 0.5 beds per thousand population, whereas China has 4.3, Korea has 12.4, and the average upper middle income countries would have about 3.9 beds per thousand population. But I'm not making these points simply because if you were to look at, across the states, if you were to look at the states, you'll suddenly find that some states in India tend to do extremely well, some states in India tend to do moderately okay, but some states in India tend to do very poorly. And therefore, it's very important that we spur growth in states which are doing moderately okay and which are not doing so well. And what can we do to spur growth? So one of the things I talked about in the morning was, and that's based on my own experience of what we've done in the Niti Aayog, is this our great belief in the spirit of competitive federalism. So actually we started with this ease of doing business, and that time we used to be ranked by the World Bank on ease of doing business. We were 142. We jumped up 79 positions in the World Bank ease of doing business. But one of the things the Prime Minister made us do was to rank states. And the first year when I was Secretary DPIIT, we did this ranking on outcomes on ease of doing business. Gujarat came number 1. The next year we did this, Andhra beat Gujarat. The third year we did this, Telangana beat both Gujarat and Andhra. Maharashtra was way behind actually. Gujarat, Andhra, Telangana. And actually, the good thing was that the eastern states of India, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, came 4th and 5th. They were 24th and 26th. They came 4th and 5th. They made massive reforms. So my belief is that if the mineral-rich states of India like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, they are able to come 4th and 5th and they make massive reforms, India will hugely grow. Because Gujarat has already grown for a very long period of time at rates of 10 to 10.5%. It's the states which are growing at low rates, they need to grow at high rates. And if the rest of India grows at those rates, India will grow and India will lift itself out of poverty. India will improve health and learning outcomes, and all these parameters will radically change. So I'm a believer, and after that, we did the ranking on health outcomes, we did ranking on education outcomes, we did ranking on SDG goals, we did ranking on innovation. But one of the case studies I really believe in was what we did with the Aspirational District program. We picked up the 115 of the most backward districts of India. We don't call them, the Prime Minister said don't call them backward, so we call them the Aspirational Districts of India. We picked up 49 parameters and we started ranking them. We talked to the states and said that the PM told the Chief Minister that post young officers. These districts were poor, these districts were backward not because there was lack of resources or lack of money. They were getting the same money which a well-performing district was getting. It was just that there was bad governance, there were constant transfers, there were posts of teachers vacant, there were posts of doctors vacant, there was extremely poor morale in the district, nobody was monitoring, there was poor governance. It was a failure of governance. And therefore, how do you set right the failure of governance is the challenge. And to my mind, the failure of challenge is the challenge of governance is the challenge in learning outcomes, in health outcomes, in nutrition. And if you are able to solve the challenge of good governance, you are able to set these things right. So in the aspirational district, we started ranking them, not on a monthly basis, but on a minute-to-minute, real-time data. We started putting it out in public domain. We started naming and shaming these district collectors, and we started rewarding the better-performing collectors. And we saw suddenly huge transformation in these districts, huge transformation in many of these districts, very far-flung districts. They were very difficult districts. But because we were ranking, we were putting it out in public domain, we found that these districts has radically improved, and many of them have actually improved better than the non-aspirational district. So we had given them this target that you become better than the best performing district of your state. Many of them in many parameters have now become better than the best performing districts of India, simply because of data, competition, ranking, naming and shaming, and using data as a powerful tool of good governance. Very powerful tool of good governance. So I am a believer. Based on my experience, many people will say many things about good governance, but I'm a very powerful believer. I'm a great believer in the power of good data, real-time data. When I was a young collector in Kerala, the data I used to get was 6 years, 7 years old. Today, technology has made this possible for you to get real-time data on a minute-to-minute basis, and therefore using this data to to really improve on all these parameters of education, on health, on all these parameters is possible. Many of them are slow-moving indicators. They may take time. But the power of putting out data and saying that so many children have not done well in maths or in education, and then using that data to use artificial intelligence. And many of our startups are doing it. They are using the power of this data to really provide extra classes to students. And they give extra classes. So Rajasthan has demonstrated that if you give extra classes, students do well, you put better teachers, and you start doing well. So many of these areas, we've seen a huge transformation. I'm not getting into the specific area of health and education because I'd like to have a more detailed panel discussion here because of the benefit of having Mr. Pankaj Kumar here. But I want to stress on one key thing, that during the last few years, much has been done on the social front. One, of course, is the Pradhan Mantri, in the Ayushman Bharat, which I talked about, the PM JAY, where we've been able to provide health insurance to over 500 million Indians, which is one of the biggest health insurance scheme of India. The challenge there was that a lot of people go below poverty line simply because of out-of-pocket expenses. People were going out because health, there was a huge expenditure of out-of-pocket expenditure, and therefore many families were not able to pay their health bills, and therefore PMJI has been able to handle their medical bills and has been able to handle some of the most vulnerable families in this. The other big thing I really think has been the new education policy, which to my mind has been really path-breaking in many ways, because it's focused, and if you were to again technologically leapfrog, it will not be possible again to use online learning in a very big way. And online learning, now that we are spreading out BharatNet across the country, how do we use the powerful tool of online learning to spread this as well? Also, various skill development initiatives have been launched, and we have a revamped apprenticeship promotion scheme that has been launched. The other is that I think it's important to stress this point on how the DBT has been used as the direct benefit transfer has been used as a very powerful tool. Throughout the COVID period, we've used this JAM Trinity and spread over the benefit of over 526 schemes and ensured that 80 crore beneficiaries during the COVID period were able to get benefit directly into their bank account. And therefore, technology has been used very effectively. The other has been that during this period, the government used the process of structural reforms across a vast range of areas, whether it was reduction in corporate taxes, bringing down to 22%, and for new companies to 15%, redefining the definition of the MSME sector, or the IBC code, or the GST. Many of these new reforms have been pushed up, or putting together the 29 labor codes into just 4 labor codes. So my view is that over a period of time, all these new reforms that have come in will drive growth in the country, and added to this will be the new, completely new push given to many of these social sector schemes. But having said this, it's very important to understand that many of these social sector schemes are a function of the state government. India is too large and too vast a country. It is bigger than 24 countries of Europe. And therefore, the only tool which the central government really has is the tool of either cooperative federalism and competitive federalism. And in both these aspects, the government of India's ambition has been that how do you spur growth in other sectors and how do you improve learning in other areas. And therefore, I would like to really state that in a country like India, it's not merely the efficiency of delivering the schemes from the central level, but the state level and eventually at the district level is the key to delivering on many of these social sector schemes. I'm a believer that there's no reason why a country like India should have one woman who's the challenge is in the nutrition sector is that your anemia is widespread, your stunting is widespread, wasting is widespread. It's simply because at the grassroots level, we have not been able to converge our education, health, and our women-child development schemes all together. And this would require a huge focus in terms of very concentrated attention to convergence at the field, at the grassroots level. So many of these centrally sponsored schemes which have been driven this really require a focus, and to my mind, states have to play a very key and a very critical role in many of these, in the administration of these social sector schemes. I am a believer that it is not possible for sustained growth over a long period of time without cooperative partnership of the states. How do we spur growth in several of these states which have remained backward in social indicators and push them into growth? It really holds the challenge to sustain growth over a long period of time. I'll be responding to many of these queries as we go along, but my view is that after hearing Pankaj Kumar, I'll respond to many of these views, many of these inputs, which may come as question-answer form. But these really hold the keys about using technology, about ensuring that delivery at grassroots level takes place, and about spurring competition among states really holds the key. Thank you very much.
I request Mr. Pankaj Kumar to give us an insight about Gujarat.
Good afternoon, Sri Amitabh Kant sir, Professor D'Souza, Professor Iyer, Professor Namrata, some of my colleagues from government who are here, and dear participants. I will be very brief and I will be leaving for two reasons. One is so much has been covered by Mr. Kant, and second is I will leave sufficient time for question and answer and discussion session. I will start and I will pick up something from what he has said. Like all technological advancement, disruptions, green hydrogen, data bank and everything, Gujarat has been a very receptive state for new ideas, and already on all these fronts we have started working on that. And in fact, like we have 6% of the geographical area of the country, 5% of the population, but our contribution to the national economy is much higher to the proportion. Around 8.1% is our contribution to the nation's GDP, 17% of the industrial output, and we have been consistently growing around 10% year to year. In fact, during COVID period also, more than half of the country's FDI had come to Gujarat only. So Gujarat, as he also rightly pointed out, India is a federation of states, and different states are at different level of development, capacity to harness the natural resources. So as we are much ahead in the many compared to most of the states, but at the same time, we have a very clear understanding from the beginning that this growth has to, this development has to transform into social equity. The state has to be just, and therefore our priorities has been the social sector, notwithstanding a land of innovations, a land of manufacturing, and all the new initiatives. Even in the renewable park, renewable energy that he has already mentioned, we are coming up with the largest renewable park in the country. It's a 30 gigawatt renewable energy park which is coming up in Kutch district. So this, how this economic development translates into a just society, the focus on the social sector has to be immense, and with passage of time, there has to be more shift towards the social sector. And I am very happy to share with you that over last 10 years, the percentage of the social sector budgetary allocation to the total developmental budget allocation has arisen from 49% to 55%. So around 55% of our developmental budget is going to social sector. And just to name, say, for the health sector, it has grown from 5.2% to 8.5%. For water supply, sanitation and housing sector, from 8.3% to 14.6%. And in education sector also, it has grown from 21%, which is the largest sector getting the state budget higher by another 1%. So in terms of, say, health sector, health, education, nutrition, these are the sectors which really needs continuous attention. And he did mention about the aspirational districts. And in fact, it all began, if I can recall, was March 2018, when the baseline survey was done. And in spite of, that's the dichotomy of the development. In spite of we having such a fast growing state, we also figured into that list of the aspirational districts. And two districts, Dahod and Narmada, if people who are not very familiar with the state, these two are the districts on the eastern side bordering Madhya Pradesh. And one district had a score of 41.61%, which was Dahod, and Narmada had a score of 41.43. So that was the score. And as he mentioned, this scoring is on a real-time basis, and so they keep announcing the rankings, and the rankings keep changing fast like a stock market. But nevertheless, both these districts have fared well, and as per the last scoring which was done in September 2021, Dahod has moved from 41.61 to 60.4, and Narmada from 41.43 to 56.8. It's a very interesting what were the interventions which were made in these districts, and lot of innovations happened there because of this focus attention, this competitive ranking, praise and shame, and so on and so forth, with continuous focused attention. And to name just one initiative which started there, now we are replicating into the whole of a state. So something which originated from the most backward district, aspirational is the encouraging name given to them, but the fact is that they were the districts which were lagging behind on the ladder of development. And that was the concept of weekly test in the primary schools. So how to improve the education, so this concept was introduced there of weekly test. And today, so I will put it slightly differently. If you talk about the primary education, in 2002-03, the dropout rate was 37%, and in a campaign mode, people who are a little bit familiar, something what we say Parvesh Mahotsav, primary school enrollment drive, that concept came, in which in the month of June, in the scorching sun, the whole government machinery along with all the stakeholders, we used to go to the schools for 3 days, engaging with the community, urging them to enroll their children into the primary school. And it was spearheaded by our Chief Minister, who is currently the Prime Minister of the country, and all ministers, all secretaries, all of us, all ranks. And that resulted into tremendous dropout reduction in the dropout rate of less than 3%. So this success in a campaign mode of bringing the dropout rates, then we started another campaign how to improve the quality of the education. And then this concept from changing from teaching to learning. And there now, the experience of weekly tests in the aspirational district, we have brought into our new endeavor, which we say mission of excellence in education. And we have picked up 20,000 of our primary schools, which constitute 50% of our primary schools, but then they house 90% of the students. So by focusing these 20,000 schools, we have now started, as mandated under the new education policy, total shift from education to teaching to learning, and over 1500 days, in 1500 days, all these schools will be converted in a phased manner to a smart school with a smart classrooms, with a smart teaching and real-time data. Real-time evaluation based on data, ensuring 100% attendance of the teacher, 100% attendance of the students, and question-wise, the weekly test will be there, and in every subject, question-wise, a student evaluation will be continuously done, such that whatever intervention would be required, question-wise means in a particular chapter in physics, what the performance of the student has been. And already we have established a command and control center in Gandhinagar, sir. I request you to make a visit there, sir. And it was to be inaugurated by Honorable Prime Minister, but then he has appreciated this. So, on a real-time basis, sitting there, we can evaluate performance of any primary school teacher about the performance of any of the students. So, that originated, this whole concept of weekly test originated from aspirational district initiatives. And lot of initiatives were taken there. And say second inning, first inning is in the school, then second inning is when you engage the retired teachers. So the list is very, very long, maybe in the question answer session or otherwise. We'll discuss about that. So how these aspirational districts, new intervention, not only improved the education parameters in those districts, but has helped us to lift the whole education system in the state. On the health front, we took and we have been taking multiple initiatives, and that has resulted into the latest Niti Aayog SDG index in health sector. For the first time, we have been ranked #1 in the country. Gujarat was always said to be lagging, told to be lagging behind in health and education sector, but now because of the hard work put into last several years, now the outcome has started flowing out of that. In providing pure drinking water, I am just giving a couple of examples just to mention how right intervention can go a long way in making and creating a just society. We are providing 6 lakhs household tap every year, and by December 2022, every rural household in the state will have a tapped water supply. On the nutrition side, we came with a concept of take home ration and Doodh Sanjeevani. So this is an intervention to 3 categories of vulnerable cross section. That is all the children from 6 months to 3 years, severely underweight children 3 to 6 years, adolescents, girls, pregnant and lactating mother. And in our sample survey, we have started witnessing the improvement which is being noticed into their nutritional status. On SDG framework, sir, I will be happy to share with you, sir. Now the district-wise framework is ready, encompassing all the 149 indicators and all the districts. Now we are doing the same sort of ranking which the Niti Aayog has been doing for us. Now we have learned that, and now we are ranking the districts on the same parameters. And finally, lot of emphasis has been put on good governance, and we are firm believer that whatever you do, the governance has to be good. Government is just one of the players, though certainly a very, very major player for governance. But if there is a regime of good governance, then all sorts of developments are possible. All potential to fulfill all aspirations of all cross section of the population is possible. And in Gujarat, we are very, very aggressive on creating a regime of good governance, not only among the departments, but in the districts also. So with this, with this steel framework of good governance, we will continuously strive to create a just society with a vibrant society, and we, on 5 things, our governance rests on. That is inclusive development through conversion, and we have a lot of schemes. We have a scheme for the travel areas where all the convergence happens. We have another scheme for the coastal areas where the conversion happens. We have one scheme for the urban areas where the conversion happens. So inclusive development through conversion, transparency, that is through use of technology, and we firmly believe that through technology, we want people to be away from us. Just use your thumb, get the services. So we want to create a distance, but at the same time, we want to increase the intimacy. Let administration go and meet people, and therefore, for last 1 month in Gujarat, the whole district administration is going to in the villages during the evening hours, what we say Ratri Sabha, and they are going to meet. They go there to meet the people. So this is how we have combined separation and intimacy. So that is how we have brought transparency. And in BharatNet Phase 2, the implementation of BharatNet Phase 2, it's a second phase to provide broadband connectivity to every village with a 100 Mbps speed, and more than 8,000 villages of the state out of 12,500 in terms of Gram Panchayats have been provided with this broadband connectivity. So this data bank and how that data can be effectively utilized for effective delivery. So in every village, now more than 200 services like issuance of ration card, income certificate, and there are more than 200 services which in the village itself, through the village center, you can get all those services. So that is the transparency, effectiveness. And finally, the programs on the campaign mode, like this ODF, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, this Paribesh Mahotsav. So when the energy of all the stakeholders get combined, and if that is properly synergized, then wonders flow out of that. So through this campaign mode, so with these 5 things, we are trying to create a state where no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an interesting 2 presentations. I mean, when we were growing up, we thought development was all about capital goods, physical infrastructure. And what we are hearing today is that actually the countries which did better were the ones who invested in human capital and not necessarily only physical capital. And so they did better in terms of education, health, and that was really the driver of growth. Okay? India was always a story where somehow we never invested earlier in primary and secondary education. We invested in tertiary education. That's why you saw IITs and IIMs and things like that. But we were never known to be having fantastic schools and primary education centers. And that's the transformation story that is happening. I tend to call it, in a sense, the new welfareism, that is taking place in India. Which actually is, a sort of a new model of development. But interestingly, at the same time as it is happening, you're also seeing a sort of a closing of the economy. You're actually seeing, tariff rates being raised. You're seeing a policy of, production-linked incentives, which is really domestic firms versus other firms. It's almost like you're going back to import substituting industrialization, And we know that one thing that correlates with growth very highly is openness. And so that's a question really for you as to, how do you see, growth actually,
So there are two very important points which Professor D'Souza has made, and one very critical. Let me first start with the second point that he made is about production-linked incentives, and it's important to understand that it's not possible for India to grow without manufacturing and exports. Whenever India has grown in the past, it's grown on the back of exports. For periods of 4 to 5 years, it's grown because your exports have grown. And that has grown because your manufacturing has been able to penetrate certain markets. Now, in a democracy, what happens is that, like instead of 5 IIMs, you have 30 IIMs now, or you keep multiplying. So every state wants something. So you are not able to create the size and scale of manufacturing in India. You start giving benefit to every single sector of the economy, and therefore, if you look at China, they picked up few champion areas and they said we will become global champion in global, say steel. So China steel penetrated the whole of global market, and they might be, if you look at the balance sheet of that company, they're making very little profit compared to other steel companies of the world, but they penetrated global markets backed by the nation. Now, our view was very simple, that if you are going to give MEI scheme in about 350 sectors, it will never be possible. You are giving whatever is available to so many producers that you will never be able to produce a global champion. How do you get the size and scale of manufacturing in India? So what is the production linked incentive scheme? It is not about giving subsidy. It is about saying that you bring size and scale to your manufacturing. If you produce to these outcomes for a period of 5 years, if you keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, I will support you to an extent of 3%, 4%, 5% as you achieve these outcomes. If you don't achieve these outcomes, you don't get any support. But having become that big, you will keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger on your own strength. So the production linked scheme is not a subsidy scheme, which many analysts like you have said. It's a scheme to bring size and scale to India's manufacturing. And that is why Apple and Samsung and all these companies were able to come to India and actually start manufacturing mobile telephones in India. Without getting that size and scale, India will never be a great manufacturer. So what the government has said is, we'll support you for a period of 5 years on the condition, and that scheme must be read very correctly, on the condition that you are going to keep growing bigger, the targets have already been fixed. If you don't achieve it, you will not get the benefit. But India must become a large manufacturer. You must create few champions. And that's why the sectors selected were very few. 10 sectors were identified. We said we'll give support to only 3 or 4 companies in each of the sectors, and we will give it only if you achieve the defined outcomes. And the outcomes are very tough targets to be achieved. Very, very tough targets to be achieved. And that is what is being done. And to my mind, production linked incentive scheme is the only way, let me say this very clearly, is the only way India will get the size and scale of manufacturing in right. And without getting the size and scale of manufacturing, it will not be possible to become a leading exporter. It will not be possible to penetrate global markets. That's number one. Number two, I am a great believer that India has to be globally competitive as far as exports are concerned. That's not possible. It's not possible that you can start manufacturing everything, and therefore the world works on a theory of competitive advantage. India will have competitive advantage in something, United States will have in some other, China will have some other, and therefore the world works on the theory of import and exports, that we import certain things and we export certain things. So when we import, there is an import intensity to export, and therefore certain goods go into the manufacturing of certain items because you are a part of a global value chain, and you have to become an integral part of the global supply chain. And those items which you are importing, which go into the manufacturing of exports, should never be taxed. The more you put taxes there, it becomes an export tax. But there are certain items where India is capable of manufacturing which we are importing. Say for instance furniture. Those are non-essentials, and those are items which do not go into your export component. Though for instance table and chairs. Why should India not manufacture them? Why should we allow China to keep exporting tables and chairs and steel furniture and all this into India? Those are non-essentials for India. Those India must become a manufacturing nation on those areas. So what we have said is you should ensure that in these areas, these 100 identified areas where India has become a large importer, certain food items which we are producing, certain food products which we are making, apples, we become massive, we produce apples in Himachal, we produce apples in Kashmir, all of them are rotting and we are importing from all over the world. So we said in those items, let us push our industry, not those where you are a component into export, not those items. There it will be wrong, but items which we can easily manufacture in India, why should we not do that? So that is what has been the philosophy of the government.
Thank you. I don't want to do a comeback. Thank you so much. I'd like to open it to the floor because I'm sure there would be interesting questions from there. Yeah. Yes, right at the back. Backbenchers.
I'm Satish Devdar from economics area, faculty here. I'll carry that idea which I think Professor Errol D'Souza also mentioned. In production linked incentive schemes, isn't it, if you may call it an incentive scheme, and you try to say it is not a subsidy, but I think, the way the system, as I understand the system works, is each company has to apply to a ministry, then it goes to a project management agency, then it goes to empowered committee, then goes to, there is the teeth to tail ratio is so long that there is always this possibility of rent seeking. Only few companies will get it. You have a cap on total number amount also that can be distributed. There will be more and more demands from different industries. Where will you stop?
No, so I'll tell you, it's as simple as this, that 5 companies get it, they give their targets in advance, which has been defined that your growth must be this much %, and if you are able to achieve that, you get the production linked incentive straight away, otherwise you don't get it. It's as simple as that. You achieve the target, you get the money. And just for a period of 5 years, the scheme lapses after 5. Either you become a global player, part of the global value chain, or you don't become.
Yeah,
So the intention is the total outlay of the scheme will be say about 20 billion. The intention is that 20 billion should be able to get you 540 billion worth of manufacturing in India over the next 7 to 8 years.
Yes.
all right, thank you.
Why I'm saying it cannot be a rent seeking, because the target has already been defined. That this is the target. You have to grow at say 10%, or in some sector even 15%. That's a tough target for Apple to achieve. Apple has to achieve 15% target year on year for the next 5 years. If it doesn't achieve it, it doesn't get it. But Apple says that I'll cross this 15%. And it has done that in the first year. It relocated because we must understand the basic principle that there is a differential in the cost of manufacturing between China and India for Apple. Why will China relocate its value chain from China to India? Unless it hasn't reached the size where the cost of production is cheaper in India than China, it says that in 3 years' time I'll make myself cheaper than in China, if I get this size right.
Sanket.
But he has to get that size, and he says that you support me for 5 years, I would have relocated my plants from China to India. That's what they've done, partly. They will keep relocating, and that's what Samsung has done from Vietnam. That's the intention. And this is the only opportunity you have, because global supply chains are in a state of flux. If you don't do it now, you would have lost this opportunity. So academically what you are saying is right, but we have to look beyond the world of academics. We have to actually get supply chains to relocate.
But as I understand, some companies have already asked for delay of 1 year, 2 year for because they are not meeting the requirements. And if at all the cost
Those
is they say,
conditions, that was in the case of the first scheme because COVID had come in for the first time, but no other changes have been made in any scheme. And we have no intention of making any changes.
Yeah, this is Sanket Mahapatra from the economics area. So,
See, we are at least being transparent. China, Vietnam are not even transparent. They say, you come here, we'll give you 20%. We have done it in a very transparent, open manner, like a democracy, good democracy.
So this is Sanket Mahapatra. So just switching gears. One of the things that we have seen in the recent days is that India has set a target of 2070 for net zero emissions. And we have seen in the recent past that we have had a coal crisis in India where we are not able to supply the power plants with enough coal. So, and it seems very likely that in the next 10, 15 years, we'll have a heavy dependence on non-renewables. I mean, even though we are shifting to renewables, non-renewables will remain a very substantial share of the economy. Now, when you're thinking about electrification, you're thinking about green energy, all of that, you're still depending to a very large extent on coal. And first, coal is, I mean, we have seen that coal production is something which, we have huge reserves of coal, but we're not able to produce. But given the net zero targets, it seems that a lot of the coal is going to remain in the ground. It's not that it'll not be viable to sort of mine the coal to the extent that we can potentially. So then, so is energy going to be one of the big challenges for a country like India when we are transforming, I mean, if you're looking at, let's say, 7-8% growth rate, is it going to be a major challenge?
So tell me, at what price is solar being produced in India?
Cheaper than coal.
What price is solar? The solar, India has hit a price of 199 to 2 rupees.
Yeah.
What price is coal being produced?
4.2.
Huh?
4.2 or something.
If coal is 4.2, renewable is 2 rupees, will you go for solar or will you go for coal? Why should the government determine this? Government created the environment for renewables. Renewable market will decide. It's not the government, not him, not I should decide. The market should decide. And the market will decide that because all the companies, and I would suggest to you, do an analysis of all the companies which got into solar. Look at Greenco, look at Renew, look at Acme. All of them, their share prices have boomed. Look at them. They've been able to attract investments from all over the world. Sovereign funds from Singapore to Abu Dhabi to all over the world have invested in them. Nobody in the world is investing in fossil fuels. The whole world is investing in renewables. If by 26 Europe says I'm going to put border tax, will the steel companies not be forced to go green? You will not be able to export. If Japan says that I'm looking for green ammonia, should we not become a champion of green hydrogen and then green ammonia in its liquid form and export? This is the opportunity for India. India should expand on its renewables, bring down the cost of solar from 2 rupees to 1 rupees in the next 5 years, and then become a global champion in manufacturing green hydrogen and run long distance transport, produce steel, produce fertilizers, green ammonia, and push. We are already using 12 to 13% of grey hydrogen on imported natural gas. We should convert that into green hydrogen. Instead of importing 160 billion worth of fossil fuel and making yourself dependent on Europe, on West Asia, on Middle East countries, should we not become a producer of green hydrogen via renewables and become an exporter of energy for the first time? You are blessed because of climatic conditions. India is blessed because of climatic conditions to be able to produce renewables. That's the biggest asset it has. And there India's competition is not with China. India's competition there is with the Middle Eastern countries. And India can be the biggest champion of renewables, of green hydrogen. And become, you can replace fossil fuel across the world with that.
And just to subscribe, in the Ahmedabad district itself, we have this Dholera special investment region which is coming up. Renew has already come there. And right now, the problem or the challenge with the solar is the banking. And very fast R&D is happening. Solar panels are being created there. So very soon this gap right now for 1 megawatt, now you have to create 3 times more capacity because of this banking issue. But once that is addressed, and very aggressive effort is going there in the private sector. We have started getting inquiries for green hydrogen to be set up in the state, and then policy framework should come into the place. So within next few years, the doubt, this sort of doubt will start vanishing once these things start coming on the ground.
See, look around the world. It's very important to look around. Why is a company like Shell going green? Shell has gone green totally. Why is Exxon going green?
I'm afraid we're
Yeah.
running out of time, so
Yeah,
last two
so
questions.
last one
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
So, sir,
Yes,
yeah.
please.
So, sir, I am the question to sir actually that, sir, actually for digital transactions, we have seen UPI as a big revolution happening in India, but there are about 748 million smartphone users in the country, but only 200 million of the smartphone users are actually using UPI and taking advantage of zero MDR. So there are about 548 million smartphone users. They are not techno savvy to use UPI. At the same time, there are 425 million feature phone users in the country who are still not doing transactions. So what is the impetus of the government policy to enable transactions for the masses, not just for the affluent classes? I am one of the innovators being supported by IIM Ahmedabad at CII incubator, where missed call pay, where we enable transactions by just using missed call, and we are going live with UPI, but we are still seeing a lot of hurdles. And we have been compared with those of Google Pays of the world and Phone Pays of the world, who are international companies with very strong, sustainable, very strong competitive advantage. Right? We as Indian innovators.
Yeah, but in India, Bharat Pay has, Phone Pay has beaten Google. Phone Pay has beaten Google, in transactions. But it's a very important and a very critical question that you have raised, and that is why the government has said two things. One is that we'll spread BharatNet in the next 1,000 days across the country through a PPP. The tender is just coming out, so that on a PPP basis we spread BharatNet all across the country, which is very important. But as I said in the morning, one is the BharatNet framework, the other is that in the meanwhile another disruption will happen, and that will happen because of OneWeb and Starlink through the satellite network. It will also happen through satellite communication. The third is that the cost of smartphone is going to fall very sharply, and you will see this happening in the next 6 to 7 months. And I have a feeling that I had never envisaged at that point of time that UPI will grow so rapidly, not merely enable digital payments, but you see the kind of disruptions which have happened in the face of insurance, credit flow. All this is happening because of UPI. Paperless banking, credit flow, all that has improved because of that. So I envisage, my personal feeling is that in the next 24 months, you will see the spread of smartphone enormously, and feature phones will die out.
No, sir, one more thing, but there are already 748 million smartphone users.
Heard you out, heard
Only
you out.
200 million have UPI.
You said that earlier, sorry.
वो होगा यार.
Yeah.
See, look at the speed at which UPI has grown, na? So, if this is the speed at which it is growing, look at the speed. It is growing at the rate of 15x month on month. So, look at this, that if it is 250 now, by next year it will be definitely 500. Everybody will switch to UPI. It's young entrepreneurs like you which have to spread the movement. अभी वो CSC centers कर रहे हैं. CSC centers के बदले आपके जैसे young entrepreneurs को करना पड़ेगा.
Definitely, sir. We are ready for it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the last question actually, yes.
Sir, you spoke about green hydrogen. So my question is in two parts. So first is that like solar, have you set any target for green hydrogen? And also this green hydrogen that will be produced through electrolysis using solar, won't that pose a challenge to the government's electrification drive? Like, won't they?
Yeah, no, so two important questions. Two things. When renewable started in Gujarat, it was 19 rupees. 19 rupees. Today it is down to 199. When started it was 19, and we in Government of India used to laugh at Gujarat doing it at 19. It's now come down to 190. Green hydrogen right now is about $4 per kilogram. Our target is that by 2025 it should come down to 2.5, and by 2030 come down to $1 per kilowatt hour. And by 2.5 it should be able to replace grey hydrogen fully, and by 1 you should become a global, at $1 India will be the cheapest producer. But for that to happen, couple of things have to happen. One is you need to mandate its use in certain areas initially. You will have to do dollar denominated tariffs. You will have to really push for its, because again you have to get the size and scale right. Because in a democracy क्या होता है कि हम लोग छोटी 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 हर चीज़ को democracy के नाम पर छोटा 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 करते चले जाते हैं. You know, हर चीज़ को छोटी, size and scale gives you the economies. Why was production linked incentive scheme done? To get the size and scale of manufacturing, because the cost of production falls then. And therefore the cost of production falling in both green hydrogen is a function of the cost of electrolyzers falling. And that is very important. So India must start manufacturing electrolyzers, and that is what India has now started doing. That once that happens, and the cost of renewables must come down, and secondly you will have to strengthen, lot of work will have to be done around the grid. So there are challenges, but these challenges must be overcome.
Thank you. I can see there are lots of questions. That's a function of the interest that you have generated, both of you. Thank you so much for this wonderful interaction with everyone here and those online as well. I hand it over to Namrata. Yeah.
I would like to thank our distinguished guests for making time to participate in the India 2031 Public Talk Series and providing their insights into how India can successfully navigate this decade of transformation. And what I believe is that they have also provided, through the session that happened in the morning as well as this session, a direction to the JSW School of Public Policy on the issues and themes of importance that we really need to pick up on both through research and our educational initiatives. I, for one, would definitely be interested in looking at how the entire rankings exercise has translated into development effectiveness. You know, that makes for an interesting question in itself. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the entire JSW SPP team, first and foremost Professor Param Iyer, for making sure that all the guests share the same stage and actually show up, and Gopal, the VP of JSW SPP, and Monica, who is the secretarial assistant of JSW SPP, for the relentless efforts and the sleepless nights that all of them have put in. And also the entire support staff for ensuring that this event goes through without too many glitches. In particular, I want to mention Sophia, the communications manager, Mr. Rajesh Khanna, Mr. Saju John, and Mr. Mahendra Singh, our security head. Thank you so much, all of you, and thank you once again, particularly to the audience for their time and engagement with the guests here. We look forward to hosting you for our future events as well. Thank you, everyone.